UCD has a particular focus on equality, diversity and inclusion. So we've come together with MoLI, the Museum of Literature Ireland, in this project called Past, Present and Pride. It's a way for us to work with, to interview, to hear the voices of LGBTI writers, Irish writers and perhaps some international writers, a way to give voice to the LGBTI experience, to advance issues of diversity, inclusion and equality. I'm Paul Dalton. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in UCD and I also work in St. Vincent's Hospital in Allen Park. It's a great pleasure and honour today for me to have a conversation with Adiba Jaigirdar, a graduate from UCD, and to welcome her back to UCD and to Newman House. So, Adiba Jaigirdar. How did I do?
Jaigirdar.
Jaigirdar. I do beg your pardon. I've been practicing that. Jaigirdar. You're so welcome to MoLI. You're so welcome to Newman House in St. Stephen's Green, where UCD began its life back in 1854, I think. And you're so welcome to Past, Present, Pride. You're our fourth guest, and we're able to be outside today. So we're delighted, and we've a wonderful background track as well to keep us company.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
It really is our pleasure. It really is our pleasure. Adiba, you were born in Bangladesh, and you lived in Bangladesh until you were 10, and you've been living in Ireland since. You did an undergraduate degree in English and History in UCD, and a postgraduate, an MA in Postcolonial Studies in the University of Kent. Have I got that right?
Yes.
You've been busy.
Yes.
You've been busy, yeah? And am I right in thinking that you have written and published both your novels, award-winning novels, during the pandemic?
Actually, no. I wrote both of them before the pandemic. I published the first one I published both of them during the pandemic, and the second one I revised during the pandemic.
Okay. So you had a busy pandemic.
Yes, I did. Yes, definitely.
And we were saying earlier on that today is the first real life event that you've had for 15 or 16 months.
I mean, technically in my life, because I've not done like a real life event as an author, because it's all been during the pandemic. So
that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
That your career as an author has been remote or has been virtual in some ways.
Yeah,
so
it's been a very unique experience.
I can't imagine. The most challenging part of that?
I think it's just been not able to meet people face to face because, especially as somebody who writes young adult, you don't really get to interact with your target audience like you might in person. If you have events or if you have signings and, teenagers might come and speak to you or get their book signed, you don't really get that experience virtually because virtually, you're usually doing events with other authors or, like yourself. And librarians. Sometimes you might do a school visit, but even then, it's not that one-to-one experience. So I really don't know what that experience is like, and I would love to have that at some point.
I hope that's going to happen. Well, today is the beginning, maybe of the beginning of that. Were there any kind of plus sides to working the last 16 months in a pandemic?
Yes, for sure. It's definitely been accessibility. Because I've been able to do events internationally. I've been able to do events, in the United States, also like just in different parts of the world, and being able to meet so many people that I just never would have been able to otherwise. So I'm definitely grateful for that.
You describe, or you're described as a YA writer. For people who mightn't be familiar with that, tell us what that means.
So YA is a category that stands for young adult. So it's basically writing fiction for teenagers. So young adult, it can be classified in different ways, I think, in different countries. But usually you're looking at ages 13 to about 18 for young adult.
Okay. And your two books, the Henna Wars and let me remember, the Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating.
Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating.
Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating. So they're both targeted at kind of 13 to 18 year olds?
Yeah.
What brought you that direction?
So I think when I was in that age group, I didn't have any books that were representative of me. So I was reading a lot of books just about white people, about non-queer people, and so that was difficult for me because books were so important to me. They were like my escapism, but then never being able to see like a reflection of myself, especially when you're young, it makes it difficult for you to accept who you are and kind of come of age, as it were. So that's definitely something I felt when I was younger. So then when I started seeing, more diversity in young adult literature and reading a lot of books that did speak of, the queer experience, the experience of being a person of color, or both of those together, I felt like that's what I wanted to write because, these are the books that I would have really wanted to read when I was younger. I think for young people, these books are especially important because they really needed to kind of understand who they are more than maybe adults do.
So as a psychologist, I'm really interested in that. What you said about kind of finding or forming an identity in the absence of finding yourself in literature, or finding your own experience in books kind of reflected back at you. And growing up for the first 10 years in Bangladesh, what was that like? Tell me, what was it like growing up in Bangladesh?
So actually, I didn't grow up just in Bangladesh. I actually grew up between Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia. So I moved to Saudi when I was 2 years old, and then every 6 months I would come back to Bangladesh. So it was 6 months in Saudi, 6 months in Bangladesh, until I was 9 years old. So it was a really interesting experience. It was a really unique experience, and I think something that was very unique about it was that when I was in Bangladesh, I was surrounded by my family. So I was very privileged to kind of meet a lot of my family, get to know them, and experience my culture, and just like live in it. So I think that's why as an adult, my culture is so important to me. But then when I lived in Saudi Arabia, even though, we were the same religion in Saudi Arabia, and I don't know if, I think this is still the case now, but there is a lot of discrimination against South Asian people because we are viewed as second-class citizens and we're viewed as labor. So, there was I felt a lot of ill will towards people like me when I was in Saudi. And I think for that reason, we didn't have a lot of interaction actually with Saudi people. It was a lot with other, South Asian people. So I think even as I was growing up in countries where, I was the majority, so to speak, well, in Saudi, I guess I wasn't, but, it was still people of color all around me. I still felt that kind of exclusion when I was growing up.
So those layers of exclusion throughout the first 10 years of your life, and not having an identity to kind of read into available to you in the books, tough, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Tough. You describe yourself as a woman of color, as a Muslim, as a Bangladeshi, and as a queer woman. That's a lot for a young life to have managed in different parts of the world. I'm particularly interested in being Muslim and being queer. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting again because when you're Muslim and you're queer, I think the first time you kind of experience that is not through yourself, through the lens of another person, because there is this idea that these two things are mutually exclusive. So when I was younger, I very much had this idea that I wasn't allowed to be Muslim and queer, that they were mutually exclusive. I think a lot of people still have this idea, and I still, experience it nowadays. But I think, again, as I grew older and, I experienced more of the world around me, and actually, as I entered into online spaces and I actually met other queer Muslim people and I saw other queer Muslim people, I felt like my identity was more validated because, I was seeing reflections of who I was. So seeing other people say, I'm queer and I'm Muslim, and they're not mutually exclusive. I can be both of these things. That made me feel like, well, that means that I can be those things as well. This is a thing that is actually valid, and I am valid in my identity.
It's probably something people maybe will be struck by, the kind of Muslim and queer, the kind of Muslim queer identity, not given a lot of air, or maybe even something that we're not supposed to talk about. And I say this, I say this coming from a different but maybe similar version of it, as Irish and Catholic and gay. So I don't know how far we are apart on that, but I'm curious what that is like for you within your community, within your Muslim community.
I think it's interesting that you said, you were Catholic and gay and Irish, because I think, I see the two experiences as very, very similar. And actually, when I was writing the Henna Wars, this is something that I actually explored, and I wanted to explore that, in both these spaces, in Muslim spaces and Catholic spaces, there is the same kind of idea about what queerness is and the same kind of exclusion. So, my main character, in the same way she faces discrimination for being queer from her Muslim family or her Muslim community, she faces the same from her Catholic community. And this is the same thing for me, because the same experience I have from my Muslim community, I've had it from Catholic people, from the Catholic community.
Yeah.
So I remember, going to school and being faced with, homophobia, and also being faced with Islamophobia as well, and a lot of other different things. So for me, the experiences have very much been the same, just coming from different communities.
Yeah, fascinating. You were in secondary school here in a Catholic
Yes.
a Catholic secondary school,
Yes.
as a woman of color, Muslim and queer. Yeah, extraordinary. Yeah. And I think we have a lot. I mean, I was thinking about coming from Bangladesh, a country that achieved its independence relatively recently in early 70s.
It's our 50th anniversary this year.
This year,
Yes.
Okay, and a former British colony, like ourselves. So yeah, probably quite a lot in common.
Actually, even more in common historically, because we also had, the partition of India and Pakistan, which was done by the British and caused such massive rifts that, the kind of religious wars that exist in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh right now, it was definitely, because of that colonialism, because of that ill will that the British left between us in order to, drive wedges between us. So Bangladesh, actually, in 1971, we achieved independence from Pakistan, not from the British.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a very long, complicated history, but there's definitely a lot in common with Ireland.
Yeah, a huge amount. And I don't know what the experience of in Bangladesh is, but I know there's certainly that idea that when the British left, that our kind of colonial nature just kind of transferred over to the Roman Catholic Church, that they kind of stood in. Was there something similar happened, or?
I think in Bangladesh, not exactly, just because in Islam we don't have, our religion is not as institutionalized as I guess Catholicism is. But what happened in Bangladesh was that, so India became independent in 1947, and that was when partition happened. So the partition of India and Pakistan, that's when Pakistan was divided into East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, and West Pakistan. So under Pakistani rule, the thing about Pakistan is that even though Pakistan and Bangladesh have the same religion, we're both majority Muslims, our cultures are incredibly different because Bangladesh is right beside India. So our culture is close to Indian culture. Actually, a lot of the ways that we even practice our religion and our culture is derived from Hinduism because those are our ancestors. So because of this, we had obviously a lot of tension between Pakistan and Bangladesh, or East Pakistan, West Pakistan. So one of the big issues was that Pakistan wanted to make their official language Urdu, which is not what we speak in Bangladesh. We speak Bengali. We don't speak Urdu. We don't write in it. That's not our language. So this caused huge tensions in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. And that's kind of what led to, we had riots, we had these riots to gain the right to speak our language. And that's actually what led to International Mother Language Day, February 21st, which is now celebrated worldwide, but it started in Bangladesh. It led to our War of Independence, which cost so many lives of Bangladeshi people because there was a genocide. There were so many war crimes committed, many of which are still, unanswered for, as it happens with wars. And then in 1971, we finally gained our independence. So I think for Bangladesh, we're still kind of dealing with that trauma because it was so recent that we haven't really had time for, that kind of what happened with Ireland to kind of happen, because right after one oppressive regime, we went into another oppressive regime. And I think we're still kind of gaining our footing. We're still trying to figure out who we are as a country.
And Adiba, where do you see that kind of trauma lived out?
Can you
explain
a little bit?
People might say, so a post-colonial history impacts a nation in a certain way. People have made suggestions in the past that Ireland's, some of the alcohol problems, some of are the result of these kinds of things, or it might get kind of played out emotionally or psychologically in certain ways. Has the same thing happened, or similar kinds of things happened?
I think it's possible. I haven't lived in Bangladesh, obviously, for a long time now, so I can't speak for the country itself. But I think there has been so much political tension in Bangladesh for a long, long time. It's calmed down a little bit now. But I think that's definitely because of the colonialism, because we don't really know who we are politically. And obviously, being in this global world, a lot of our politics are directly affected by our previous colonizers, like Britain. So that's definitely something. I think psychologically as well, actually, in terms of queerness, I think we can see how colonialism has directly kind of affected how queerness is viewed in South Asian countries like Bangladesh. Because I don't know if you know this, but in India, being gay was criminalized by the British when they colonized us. And before this, there was, a history of queerness in South Asia for a long time. I'm sure, there are positives and negatives, but it wasn't criminalized. It was, a part of our history, it was a part of our culture. And ever since, the British came, they criminalized it. I think there's just been a massive shift, and we haven't gotten back to what we were before. It's very difficult to kind of change people's mindsets and to change politically how people view queerness. And I definitely think, colonialism had a huge effect on this. So I definitely think, there are many ways that we see this trauma play out.
Okay. And homosexuality is still, the death sentence is enforced, or is on the statute books at least.
Yeah,
in
it
Bangladesh.
is.
Isn't that correct?
I think so. Yes.
To this day.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure,
Okay.
but I believe so. Yes.
Adiba, you talked about Islam as not as institutionalized as Roman Catholicism, for example, is, and therefore maybe it has kind of it's a little more porous maybe when it comes to issues like queerness. Is there an official line from Islam on being gay, being queer?
It's kind of difficult to answer that question because, for example, in Catholicism, you have, the church, you have a pope
Yeah.
who can say, this is, our view on this.
Yeah.
But like that just absolutely does not exist
Yeah.
in Islam. So there can never really be, an official idea about anything in Islam because we don't have institutions like that. We have, respected leaders who may say certain things, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with that, or not everybody will be following the same kind of
Okay,
leaders,
yes, yeah.
because it's more community based rather than universal, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think people have read certain things into things in the Quran, the same way that people have read certain things into things in the Bible. So I guess that would be the official idea, which is kind of the official line on queerness in all religions.
Yeah. And tell me, how have you navigated your way through your religious, your faith and your sexual identity?
So I think for me, I always grew up, as a Muslim person. That was like one of my first identities, And I think when people meet me as well, one of the first things they will notice about me is that I am, I'm Muslim and I am brown. Those are two things that you can't really deny about me, I guess.
We can't escape to get away from that.
You
Yeah,
can't.
yeah.
So they've definitely been very important parts of my identity for a long time in my life. And definitely when I was a teenager, I think I found Islam something that was not something that I wanted to really be a part of, just because of how people viewed Islam, not because of how I viewed it, if that makes sense. And I think, that was one of the difficulties for me growing up, and not seeing a reflection of Islam, of queerness, of any of these things, because I felt like I couldn't accept my identities and I couldn't be who I was. And then again, growing up and being able to meet other queer Muslim people and being able to have these discussions about what does it mean to be queer and Muslim, and what does it mean, what does our faith mean to us, and how does that work with our sexuality? I think that's been really important. And to see, other people, to have friends who are queer, who are Muslim, who practice their faith in different ways, who come from different countries, who are from different races, but we have this thing in common, that we are queer and we're Muslim. I think it just solidifies to me that, there are 2 billion Muslim people in the world, and obviously there's going to be queer people. And, we are like, I believe, we're all made by God, and God made us the way that we are. So if there was not supposed to be queerness in Islam, then, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, it wouldn't exist. You've said, or at least I've read somewhere, that in your regular life, that you speak several different languages sometimes in one day, and you described yourself as reading, or sometimes as speaking Banglish. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So Banglish is basically Bangla and English combined. So Bangla is what we speak in Bangladesh, or Bengali, as we say in English. So Banglish is basically what I would speak with my siblings and my cousins, because it's just a mix of Bangla and English. And I think it's almost like a language in itself, because it feels so familiar to us. It doesn't feel familiar to, my parents, whose first language would be Bangla, or to people whose first language would be English. But it's just, speaking in, say, English, and then just switching over for certain words, or combining certain words together to make a word that is both English and Bangla. And I think this exists for most people who are kind of like a third culture person. So this is like a way that they navigate being able to speak multiple languages and being comfortable in multiple languages, especially with people who are close to them. I think if you have siblings and cousins, I feel like you're more likely to have that language.
And you say that the third culture? Tell me what you mean. Describe that to me. So
third culture, I think for me what it means is when you are basically part of 2 cultures, but you're like in the middle. So you're it's like a third culture that you've created for yourself, which combines both of these cultures.
And for you right now, kind of where is home? Is there a first culture? Is there a home? your sense of home?
Well, for me, I think my sense of home is definitely here, just because, this is where my family is, and this is, where I've grown up. It's where all my friends are. But it's also complicated because, I have so many memories of my home in Bangladesh, where I did grow up and where I lived for such a long time. So I wouldn't discount that as home,
Sure.
but for sure, my first home, I would say, is the home that I've lived in for a long time, where my family is.
Adiba, one of the things that we're working on in UCD is what's kind of commonly, or what's sometimes referred to as, decolonizing the curriculum. And I've been thinking about that and thinking about us meeting today, and I really wanted to find out a little bit about what you think about the term decolonizing and the attempt to decolonize a curriculum. Can you let me know what you think about some of that?
So I think decolonization is an interesting term because I think in a lot of ways it's become a buzzword in how a lot of things become buzzwords after use. I think if we really want to decolonize the curriculum or anything else, it needs to be very structural as well. It needs to be that it's not just we're reading texts that consider colonization or post-colonization. Is that we need staff there that are trained to do this. It needs to be coming from all sides. It can't be half-hearted for real decolonization. But to be honest, I don't know that much about decolonizing a curriculum, so I wouldn't be, I guess, the best person to speak on it. But that would be my opinion.
So I think it comes back a little bit to our conversation earlier on. When I think about this, anyway, I think we have a curriculum, we have a reading list, and we cite research, and I speak to this as a psychologist, and we have certain images, and at some level, this is only one aspect, isn't it, of decolonizing something, but a very important aspect nonetheless. And I think it's one of those for me, it's been one of those light bulb moments that when I realize how colonized our teaching curriculum is, it's like, oh gosh, this is a curriculum that relies so heavily on white, Western, middle-aged men. And that's a bit of a light bulb moment, personally. And then it's hard not to see that, how skewed so much of our education is to not include people who don't fit into those categories. Sometimes the acronym WEIRD is used, the white, industrialized, educated, democratic. And I think psychology certainly has, maybe needs to really think about some of its position on where we sit on making very grand statements sometimes about humanity based on a very, very small segment of humanity. Does that make a little bit of sense to you?
Yeah, definitely it does. Yeah, I think this is something that we see a lot, I guess, with academia, because I remember when I was in UCD, I do feel I feel like I was lucky because a lot of the courses that I got to take did feature a lot of authors of color. And it was actually some of my first time reading authors of color in general. So that's kind of what made me interested in studying post-colonial literature, because I got to read these authors of color. But it was also interesting because a lot of the time it didn't feel connected to Ireland and to what I was studying, even because when I was studying these authors of color, it was always world literature. It was, American studies, and it was always one or two of these authors, So I think, academia does have a long way to go to do with decolonization, but hopefully it's getting better.
What was your experience like in UCD over those years?
It was It was a good experience. I think I really enjoyed my time there. I feel like I got a really good education, a really good education to go forth and do my master's and write the books that I have been writing. But also it was very lonely as well at times because, you know, as you know, in UCD, the biggest theater, or at least when I was there, was Theater L in the Arts Building. And because I was studying English, I was often there. And as an English student, oftentimes Theater L would be full.
Hundreds.
Yes, it would be full.
Yeah.
And there would be, every time I would have a lecture there, I would go in and I would look at all the people around me. I would be the only person of color.
And Adiba, there could be 300 or 400 people there.
Yes.
You were the only person of colour sitting in your lecture.
Yeah.
Lonely. In reading your books, I have kind of thought, gosh, this is a form of decolonisation. I think you're actively decolonising some of the canon. You're providing. You know that we touched on it again, but that idea that a curriculum or that literature or indeed even popular culture needing to provide a window and a mirror. So our curriculum provides a window into other experience, but also, and crucially, it provides a mirror back to one's own experience. So I think of you in Theatre L, there physically, but also with the curriculum that didn't provide the mirror back to your experience. And I read in your work a real attempt to do that, to provide better windows and better mirrors. Is that some of the motivation behind your work? It is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for all writers, we're always trying to capture this idea of universality, right? Because this is something that we always say as a positive. This work, this piece of fiction is so universal. Everybody can connect to it. But I think as authors of color, that is very difficult to achieve because as soon as you put a person of color in your book, it's already somehow not universal because it's a person of color. And we're told that, people can't see themselves in a person of color. But I think, all books are universal if they are specific because, universality is not in a white person being at the center or a non-queer person being at the center. It's in like the heart of a book, it's in those themes that you can connect to. So that's what I always try to achieve. I try to achieve the specific and hopefully in that way it can be universal.
Right. That kind of personal to the to the universal.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. I think that idea of seeing ourselves in literature is very powerful, isn't it? When we see ourselves, I think by virtue then are validated and connected to a community. I mean, you said that even maybe with your online experience of other Muslims who are queer. Something very powerful happens when we see ourselves in the world, and something very powerful happens when we don't see ourselves in the world.
I definitely agree with that, yes.
And you're helping, your writing is putting a spotlight onto experience that for in your life, in your growing up, wasn't there. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that? Or
So, yeah, I think that's been one of the most gratifying things actually about writing and being an author is that so many people have, reached out to me after reading my books and they have said, I've never read a book like this before where, I could see my experiences. And then hearing also people say, now I feel like I can speak, speak to other people about my experiences, or I can be an author. I can write about women of color, or I can write about queer Muslims. I think that, that is an amazing feeling. It's a very gratifying feeling because obviously when I was younger, I didn't have that feeling. So I think that's amazing. And I'm really glad that, we're seeing more and more of this. We're seeing more authors of color, more queer authors from all different backgrounds. And we're seeing them, getting the opportunity to write their books and write them authentically to their experience. And hopefully that just means, more and more people will be able to see a reflection of themselves.
Yeah. I'm kind of struck by the kind of disruptive potential of literature, the subversive potential of literature to kind of disrupt the social order that that is created and maintained because it suits some people, and how powerful literature can be in being subversive. And that's why books have been banned, isn't it? That's why, because it's so powerful.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I've been reading your work, I'm hearing that it's quietly subversive, in the best possible way. Is there a cost to that for you?
I think there is, and I think this is the case for a lot of authors of color, that we feel, or a lot of marginalized authors, I suppose, is that we feel like we have to meet a certain expectation, or we have to write to a certain expectation, and we feel like we have to represent every single person in our entire community, because if somebody reads my books and they take away something negative, it's going to reflect on everybody in my community somehow. But obviously this is, it's not really achievable to represent everybody in a community. It's impossible. But I think that is the cause. There's a lot of pressure on you to do that, even though it's impossible.
Yeah, quite a burden there. Quite a burden.
For sure.
Adiba, you've two more books, which we're going to see next year, I think, and the year after. 1 in a million?
1,000,000 to 1.
1,000,000 to 1.
Yes.
And Donut fell in love?
Don't fall in love.
Fall in love. So you're working hard.
Yes, very hard.
What does your writing day look like now?
So I've never been a person who likes routine. So I always say that I'm a very chaotic writer. So my writing day is not like, it can look like anything, honestly. I try to change it up all the time. And, because of the pandemic, I'm at home, I'm surrounded by my family, so there's a lot going on all the time. So right now is just, whenever I find a little bit of peace and quiet and I can write, I'm hard at work.
And what would you say to younger people out there who would like to be doing what you're doing, who would like to be writing, who would like to be writing the unwritten back in? What would you say to them?
I would say to keep going, because I think when you are one of the first really in any field, when you're one of the first, or when you're doing something that hasn't been done before, it can be really, really difficult because there are people trying to close the door on you. And so you have to be a person who doesn't care about the closed doors, who's breaking those doors down. And it can be difficult, but I think it's worth it to keep going, because there are so many people, waiting for you to write that book, or to do whatever you're doing, and to hear your voice, to hear your story. So, just keep going. That would be my advice.
Adiba, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you today. And it's been a pleasure to read your work. I can only wish you well, and to thank you for your disruption, for breaking those silences. And it's just so fitting that we've been able to have this conversation in MoLI, in Newman House, where your alma mater began its life. So on behalf of the team here at MoLI and my colleagues at EDI in UCD, we want to say a very big thank you, and to wish you the very, very best into the future. And I do hope we meet again.
Yes, thank you so much. It was really great speaking with you, and it was great to be here. And to have this conversation. It's always a privilege.
No, privilege is ours. Thank you.
Thank you.
For me, literature, for me, writers, for me, the arts, in some ways, capture what's often missed in conversation, what's often missed historically when it comes to the lives of people who, for various reasons in this country and beyond, don't experience an equal world, a world that is accommodating, is embracing of diversity, and certainly a world that isn't inclusive. So I feel the arts and literature play a very, very central and important role in advocating for a more equal, a more just, a more diverse and inclusive society.